Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Family Office Roundtable podcast with me, Benjamin Ulrich. And today I'm very, very pleased and excited to announce a very special guest to me. We have Claire Reid on the show. Claire, thank you so much for coming.
I'm really excited about our conversation today, Benjamin. So happy to be here.
Me too, me too. And let me just introduce you quickly to our audience, yeah? And then we'll jump right into the conversation. So for everyone who don't know Claire yet, Claire is and I'm going to read this, please. Claire is a strategic entrepreneur and property investor based in Birmingham with a track record of transforming assets into high performing investments. She, you co-own and lead Ilston and Robson, a successful small and medium enterprise manufacturing business where your strategic leadership has driven growth and operational efficiency while, and here it's interesting, allowing you to step back from the day-to-day management of the organization. Second, you're an experienced property investor having structured and acquired your first property portfolio using creative strategies like, let me get this right, purchase lease options.
That's right.
And you're known for your sharp thinking, your ability to optimize value, and future focused approach to business and investing. You're passionate about building wealth through smart asset acquisition and strategic leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to let the audience know,
Mm-hmm.
we have met through a mutual connection of ours. That is Callum Lang from Singapore.
Callum.
Callum, who is the founder of two programs. One is the Veblen Directors Program. One is the GILD program, the Global Investor Leader Directive. Claire, once again, welcome to the show.
Let's go. Let's do this.
Let's do this. So I've kind of semi-structured this conversation, and let's start quickly with you getting everyone on board on how you've gotten to where you are today. What is important for us to know, sort of, about your biography?
So obviously we're here talking today, and the people that are going to be listening to this are interested in business and investing. So let's start with that side of things. I didn't come from an environment of money or investments. I grew up in a very kind of working class family and setting. So for me, my whole kind of late teens and 20s was a journey about learning about wealth building to the point where it was kind of a hobby. I got so interested in it and pulled into that world and decided quite early on that I knew at some point I wanted to own and run my own business, because I could see that that was the first step and the kind of entry level into this world. And that opportunity came up in 2017, 2018. When me and my fiance, the opportunity came up for us to buy the manufacturing company that you mentioned there, Ilston and Robson, as a partnership, and that was our first and kind of big step into being investors and to being entrepreneurs and business owners as well. It's a business that has kind of multiple million revenue. So we didn't start small. We jumped straight into a big company that was already supplying global. And we were able, between my strategic vision and his technical ability as an engineer, we were able to see how we could take that business and transform it for the next iteration of its life and the next generation. And then since then, I've been continuing on that journey and learning about wealth building, learning about wealth management, and realized that I have this knack for asset management and optimization, like you said, and that's then rolled into property as well. And I'm really enjoying the journey.
Wow. So so maybe just like, I can see that this magnetic pull of you and your fiance back then, like teaming up. I see already like having a circle of trusted both advisors or executives. We're going to come to relationships, but what I didn't know was like you had that vision for you going into business and investing, and within a short span of a few years you bought a company. What happened? How is that happening to someone like you?
I think when you set a goal for yourself, and it's very, very clear, you become, it's almost like putting on special glasses, and that suddenly you see the opportunities around you, which you would have been blind to before. So, because for me, I knew that that was something that I wanted to do, then I wasn't hustling. So I wasn't out there kind of speaking to brokers and trying to make this happen. It was this element of luck. And really, when you break luck down, what is it? It's being in the right location, being the right knowledge, being ready to take on that opportunity, and also being able to identify what is an opportunity and what isn't, what's a trap. And so those, all of those separate elements sort of came together. And, for me, it was very clear. For me, it was, we should do this. But, he's now my husband, and we have a 4-year-old child together as well. So we've managed that sort of transition and growth as a family at the same time as growing the business. But for him, he wasn't necessarily straight on board, Benjamin. Like we had to talk it through. We had to really plan it out and say, hey, what would that look like? So I make it sound like it was a straightforward, easy. Why wouldn't we? For me, it was. But there's, and I guess we'll talk about relationships more. But that's why we work well, because I think for everybody who's an accelerator, I think you and I are both accelerators. We need breaks. We need people who are going, hold on, let's just check this. Let's just cross-reference that, which can feel really frustrating sometimes, but is absolutely essential to stop accelerators from kind of pushing themselves too far.
Is that some sort of framework, the accelerator, and maybe are you referencing a personality test or?
Somebody's probably come up with it, but it's just
Okay.
it's an analogy that I've just popped into my head, because you think about driving, you have the push and the pull. Somebody's probably trademarked that and turned it into a framework, because it's such an easy one for kind of contextualizing, but there isn't a framework that I could sort of reference and give you an exact person for who's sort of come up with that.
Yeah, I get it. So let's slowly move our way into the investment side of things. And I think we can always kind of meander around the business part, like Ilston and Robson, and like managerial, executive tasks, strategy. We have all the business functions and all of that. But before you actually stepped into the role of a director by buying the company, you were an investor and you acquired that company. So there are, and I'm calling this the Family Office Roundtable podcast because, first of all, it's supposed to be a brain trust, so everybody who is sitting at the table can benefit. Secondly, there's this part of investing, like you mentioned asset management, right? And then let's open up a tangent, like the estate planning, maybe a family trust, and legacy for your family. Like what is the plan for the wealth that you are accumulating now? We're both still very young and hopefully we'll live long, but then at some point we want to pass it on. How do you think about that? But before we get there, let's zoom back and hear it from you. How, and we speak about private equity in terms of like buying a company, and then we can talk about like private real estate, like how to buy into real estate as an investment asset class. How do you, and take this any way you like, but introduce us to your mental models, to your framework, like what is important for you as an investor?
So it's funny you mentioned private equity there. The more that I've read about private equity, the more I've seen like, oh, that's very similar to what we did, but I just didn't realize that that's what I was doing at the time. I was like, oh, okay, so that's what it is. Oh, it has a name. Excellent. Yeah, so when I was looking at this business as an asset, so not looking at it from the business side of things, not looking at the operations, the sales, and the nitty gritty, but taking that step back, as you said. So as a buyer of this business, what is giving me the good feels that this is a great way to grow the investment and also to have that security in it. Because particularly when we're thinking about family office, family wealth, generational wealth, we're not venture capitalists here. We're not putting bets on the table and hoping that 1 in 6 pays off. We're thinking every pound in, so every euro, every dollar needs to work. It needs to pay back and be protected for the long term. So that was very much the thinking that I had as well at the time. And I looked at the asset, and there were a few green flags for me, which I'll happily share if you're interested in that. So the first one was cash flowing already. So there is already an existing momentum and movement here. There are people in private equity and venture capital that do very well off distressed businesses. That's not my bag. That's not what I was looking at here. We've got a good, solid business with great financials, good cash flow, retiring ownership. So there is definitely that opportunity for next generation to come in, modernize, improve, thinking about what the next 20, 50 years are going to hold and how the business needs to protect itself and adapt for that. And there was also a core product which had existing customers, long-standing customers. So we weren't trying to prove a new concept here or start a new app or do anything that wasn't already really well established. So that gave the confidence there of like there is an existing market, existing product, a healthy business, opportunity to not only improve internally but to expand so that we're able to identify growth opportunity. And those things all came together. So the state of the business that it was in, the stability, the good balance sheet, the good profit and loss, that gave that security element. Because of it being manufacturing as well, you've got a lot of physical assets to back up. So this isn't kind of an agency or something that's intangible. At the end of the day, if you needed to blitz everything and sell off the assets, there are solid in-person real life assets that are available. And then the growth element was seen through not just the opportunity to grow the markets that we were in, but also to create better efficiencies and systems within the business.
Right. I think you touched on a few, what I've picked up from like family wealth. You touched on risk mitigation, risk management. You touched on every pound, like it needs to work. And I particularly like this, the baby boomers who are retiring. So I'm involved with initiatives in Germany, for example, where it's very important to kind of make sure that all these SMEs manufacturing, like they're carried into the next generation, because otherwise they'll just turn off the lights, close the door, and throw away the key, and everybody goes home.
Yep.
Okay, so you buy the business, and was that sort of, it sounds like you're not the type of person who is reading a lot of books. I mean, do you function from theory first, or do you kind of accelerate until you realize, okay, there are missing elements, and I need to educate myself on finance, on law, on like how to do an M&A transaction? And then do you read this and study this yourself, or are you more like working with people, hiring consultants and talking to your network?
It's such a variety of those elements, because sometimes you don't get the opportunity to go, oh, everybody stop, I need to go and study or read or catch up on this. Sometimes things are moving so fast that you do have to bring in the right people. And we've definitely had bad experiences of trusting the wrong consultants. And, you can't hold these things. You make the best decision that you can at the time and you learn from them. But there's definitely something to be said of don't always trust the professionals, have that background or have just question things a little bit more, and make sure that you've I'm not yeah it's pretty tricky to give advice around this, because like you say, you don't know what you don't know until it's already happened. So definitely leaning into professionals, consultants that you can trust, or that you have somebody who you trust as a mutual reference point. That's really key. For me, because I'd already got sort of 10 years of knowing that this was the ultimate destination. So I've been reading business books and sort of building up an internal bank of theory, really, of a philosophy of how I was going to approach owning a business, investing in a business. So, and that was really born more from, people have their things that they nerd out on. I really nerd out on business philosophy. So I was building that in the background. So that helped. The consultants helped. But most of it really is just trusting yourself and trusting your instincts and trusting that and you can work it out. Everything can be worked out. And there's a lovely phrase that I sometimes have to remind myself, which is, the bird doesn't trust the strength of the twig, it trusts the strength of its wings. So, you have to really believe in yourself and your ability to solve whatever problems are going to arise, and navigate through those. Because it's not always possible to predict every step and fully prepare for it. But likewise, going in without doing any preparation or having any sort of advisory support around you can also get you into difficulty. So for us in this example, so this investment, we had accountants, solicitors, and that was really it. So those were the two professionals that we had. So we didn't have a broker. We were doing direct to vendor. We didn't have an M&A consultant involved at all. It was just those two professionals. Then we had, like I said, this built up bank of theory and philosophy that was in my head. And then we just had our wits and our grit and our ability to trust that we would work it out at each step. And that got us there. That got us there fine.
And it's fair to assume and say that you two setting out on this journey with maybe you in the leadership, with the vision and the image already materialized in your mind. And there was this business owner who is retiring from what is a solid company, like a legit company. And you kind of approached him, and then he approached you, and you had some help like on some of the details, but you could judge from your ability that this was real, it was solid, it was common sense in a way, within like this private equity M&A transaction. Okay, because in all fairness to the listeners, when we kind of had the idea for this conversation, I told you like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm prepared. I'm not sure if I'm ready to do a deal, and that image of the bird that doesn't know if the twig will hold, but the bird doesn't care because the bird knows it can flap his wings and always lift off again, right?
Yeah.
So I'll take that with me. Sort of trust in oneself comes, and I've recently spoken to some family office advisors or family advisors, not so much, well, office, but more to the family and the heirs. And you kind of, as an heir, you also like your child, right? Then they want to maybe learn and grow into that. And you kind of want to foster that ability of themselves to trust themselves, right?
Yeah.
That is something, I think that is something very beautiful. Whether you do it as a director to your staff and your team, or
Yeah.
in society, or in your street, or like, that's nice, I find.
Yeah. And it's allowing that space for mistakes to be made, but mistakes to be remedied and mistakes to be accepted as part of the journey. And when I say mistakes, I mean that, we'd all love everything to be perfect, but it's never going to be. So where are the wins? Where are the learnings? Because it's either one of those things. Either you win or you learn, especially with, like you say, heirs or people that are, or just, people like yourself, like trusting yourself, giving yourself that same opportunity to learn and stumble a bit and make some mistakes along the way. That's part of the journey. It's part of the journey. And the more I read biographies of the great business moguls, millionaires and billionaires, it's littered with these mistakes, littered with them. But, we don't see that. I think when people think about investing, there's a very kind of glossy screen of mistakes are not allowed. One bad bet can spoil the lot. And that's where the risk mitigation comes in. That's where the management of that. So giving people enough space to grow and learn, but it's not going to take everything down.
Right. So let's move to the segment of you've bought this company, and I don't know if you want to go into like how you structure the company so you can actually remove yourself from it.
Yeah.
Because the next segment then will be like mitigating the risk also means not divesting, but diversifying into other asset classes.
Absolutely.
But maybe someone who is totally bogged down in his director role, somebody who is completely involved in every minute detail of the company, doesn't probably have the mindset to think long term, to think strategy, and to start diversifying the portfolio and start learning about another asset class, which is property. So maybe before you take us to the property side, take us through what you did. What's the magic behind removing yourself to a certain extent from day-to-day operations?
Yeah, you raise a very, very good point, because if we are bogged down in an investment and trying to make that work, then we're not freed up in terms of time resources, capital resources, and mental resources to then grow the investment portfolio. So one of the learnings definitely from this experience was when the business that we purchased, it had a structure which had the two previous directors and no management structure underneath that. So everybody reported into and out of this kind of hub and spoke model. So one of the first goals that we had coming in was to change that. So one of the very first things we started to do was build a senior management team. So purely due to the timing of this acquisition. So, we completed the purchase just at the end of 2019. Excellent timing for one thing or another. So when I say it took 3 years, it didn't really take 3 years. It just took 3 years because of all the problem solving that we were having to do with, what was going on in the world during that time and how it was impacting the business. But really, it didn't take long at all. So it was thinking about the structure of the business being really strategic and making sure that there was the directorship being the vision and the direction and the decision making. And then we had a senior team that could really support that and drive it forward and help delegate out the decision making and the systemization as well. That in and of itself, that was the core start to being able to exit operationally from the business. So I think I set a goal, and actually from the point where I said, right, I want to be out by this date, that was only 9 months. So within 9 months, everything that was still kind of on my plate that I was kind of responsible for delivery with, we managed to either delegate or bring people in to the business to take that over. Like I say, so within 9 months, that was cleared. And then what that meant was, as you say, my resources, kind of into the energy resources, mental resources, capital resources, etc., were freed up to look at different asset class. So property in this case, I was drawn to property. I thought that would be a nice variation. So rather than going and doing a business and then another business, it was like, okay, let's switch this over. Let's switch asset class, because then that's a risk management element. You know, when one's doing well, the other's probably doing steady, and vice versa. So that's how that decision came about. The absolute core, like I said, is making sure that you've got the right support team within the business. Now, some smaller businesses can't necessarily front that cost. And that's when, you know, when we're looking at acquisitions, that's one of the things that people need to take into account. I think the rule of thumb, if you wanted to kind of, you know, finger to the wind, is below $1 million turnover, there isn't the money that's coming into the business to really build that. Obviously, there's always exceptions to the rule, but that's the kind of the rule of thumb with acquisitions. So most people who can see this problem are looking in the 2 to 5 million bracket, where there's often that owner operator, they exit out and they need that structure being put into place because it wasn't there previously. But there is revenue coming into the business to make that transition and support that transition financially.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So so then so then you removed yourself again with that vision of like, that's my goal. I want to remove myself. And within 9 months, you started to free up the time. And so you started to looking at property. This is not, or I can't sort of, I know very little about property, and I know even less about UK property and so on. Because you've closed a property deal, right? And if you could sort of walk us through what you think is most important to know, and then I would like to kind of, once we cleared that segment, I have an idea to talk about Veblen and GILD and sort of the present, and then the future, you know?
Love it. Yeah. So I really love that question. If there's just one thing that I can let you know. So anybody can go and buy a property. If you've got money, you can go and buy a property. You don't need smarts or knowledge. Anybody can go and do that. I wasn't interested in that. I wasn't interested in just being somebody that throws money into things. I was really, really interested in learning about creative finance solutions. So with the business, for example, we used vendor finance as a model to acquire that business. So, and again, I didn't know that's what it was called. This thing has a name, but we just did it. And so that really worked for me, because you want to talk about leverage and you want to talk about optimization. The creative finance element to it is so key. So key. So there's a couple of things there with property. So you've got vendor finance, where the seller becomes the loaner of the capital to allow for the acquisition, and then you kind of pay that off gradually over time. Purchase lease options. So that was the tool that I used for this portfolio acquisition, which is an agreement to pay. So you don't own the properties from step one, but you have the right to buy in a set period of time. And in the meantime, you have operational ownership of those properties, management of the assets, and you pay the legal owner an upfront fee and a monthly fee out of the revenue, the rents from the properties. You can then do the asset management play, and then the acquisition happens and completes it at a future point. Very similar to kind of exchange with delayed completion. So there's an upfront element and then a delayed element. All of these things, anything that falls under the umbrella of creative finance, is definitely beneficial to property investing. Why is that the case? It allows for a more flexible approach to how the capital gets deployed. So rather than having this huge upfront capital requirement, it gets diluted. You have the opportunity being key. So you do have to put the work in, but the opportunity to uplift the value of that asset in the space of time between point A and point B. In some cases, you can do that. So then the deposit element that's required at the point of acquisition has been created through the equity that you've created in the properties by knowing how to uplift the value.
Okay. I mean, it kind of reminds me of what you said before. You have a vision of what you want to achieve, then you go about doing it because you kind of know where your leverage is, and then it's about meeting the right opportunity at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Again, kind of like being a patient observer on the sidelines and then reacting to when the right opportunity comes your way, sort of like opportunistic in a way.
Yeah, it's one of the Warren Buffett methodology where they'll only do kind of one deal a year, but it'll be a really, really great deal. And I could see a lot of other property people, particularly, really burning themselves out, doing deal after deal after deal after deal, and you talk to them, and they're not really actually generating any revenue, but also when we're thinking as investors, we're really interested in the balance sheet. We're really interested in that equity gain and the equity uplift rather than just the cash flow. And so I could see, well, if that's what everybody's doing and that's the results, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look for examples of people who are doing really, really good deals, but maybe only one or two a year, and sort of not copied, but mirrored what they were doing, and took the learnings from that, because that's where my focus is as an investor rather than, a deal making on the ground, hustle kind of person.
How do you meet these people and how do you go about finding out how they do their one deal per year?
So people love to talk about what they've done. People love to talk about their successes and also their failures. And similar to yourself, I have an unsatiable curiosity. So it's just really just like you can find people either through they've been on somebody else's podcast, or they have their own podcast, or they've got social media posts, or you ask your network and they might know of somebody, and you follow the lead,
Yeah,
follow the
the
lead, and
the
then
breadcrumbs.
yeah, and then eventually, once you get to that core person and their vocalization of what they've done, people are so happy to talk
Yeah.
to you about their wins and successes and what they're doing well. Particularly in, if you think about the world of investing, whether it's particularly these two type of asset classes, so businesses and property. There's plenty to go around. The people aren't playing their cards to their chest. There's so much, and actually, the people that do well are people who are open to doing partnerships and joint ventures and working together. So you find that actually, that in terms of sharing that knowledge, people can be really generous.
Yeah.
They might not go, oh, here you go, here's my spreadsheet that I
Right.
used.
Right.
You have to kind of, what's the word, reverse engineer some of it and use your own smarts and your own knowledge. But the sort of the overall strategy, the guidelines, they're definitely there.
That is so amazing. Really funny. What a coincidence. I like it. I'm loving it. I love to hear it. In my brain, there's lots of firework,
I
like
bet.
lots of lights going on.
You need a notebook as well by the side just to go, keep a track of all these thoughts that are coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Can I invite you, if you think now is a good time, can I invite you that we move to another segment, which I prepared a question for us that has to deal with relationships. But before we get there, I would like to maybe ask if you wanted to share a little bit about those networks I've spoken about before, Veblen and GILD, because you're how can I say, an ambassador? You're even
Yeah, so
right. So
I'm a member of both, and actually for Veblen, I'm currently on their advisory board. So
right,
it's yeah,
right, right,
yeah. No, I
right.
so I Veblen came into my world via a contact, and we were just having a catch up. Again, it's all about conversations and relationships, right? So we were having a catch up, And I'd mentioned, I was getting to the point where I was thinking, I'd love to explore what it's like to be a non-executive director. And that was really identifying and then playing on the strength of this strategic visionary element of my skill set, and thinking where I might be able to help other people by using that skill set. And this contact said, well, you need to have a look at this, Veblen. And for me, it was a no-brainer. I was like, this is brilliant. This is great. I loved the fact that there was a system, a strategy, a process by somebody who I greatly respect and admire, and had so much kind of proof of this concept working, which was of course Callum. And I also kind of think that his approach to business and conversations is very accessible, very down to earth, and all of these things were very appealing. And so I joined, and quite soon after that, I got invited to apply for my first board role. What I love about advisory boards, actually, and it's one of the things that I wasn't necessarily thinking about before, is how you can really explore your passion projects through being on an advisory board. So you don't have to say, if you're a medic, you don't have to stick with medic-based advisory boards. You might have a love for charitable causes or tech startups, or I don't know, board games. It doesn't matter, but you can really position yourself as bringing your skill set from your professional experience into this new world that you feel really passionate about. So for me, female leadership has always been something that I wanted to encourage and support. So it was a fabulous meeting between the opportunity to sit on the board of a company called Elect. And Elect's whole mission is to get more women into senior leadership across the world, and then able to then kind of create more roots and equality across the board that way. So for me, it was a great match and a great opportunity to learn what it meant to be on an advisory board, what that looked like, and learn a little bit more about myself and how, as a non-executive, so as I'm not the CEO or the COO here, or even a director. I'm here to support and advise the executive team. And there's different skill sets, there's different boundaries. So it's a great way to learn that process. And then when the opportunity came up to apply to sit on the Veblen board itself, which I love because it's so meta, being on the board of Veblen, which helps people get onto boards, brilliant. I felt, I really want to support this community and help to strengthen it, because goodness knows how much each of us have got so much knowledge and value that we could bring, to an advisory role. Why would we not want more of that, and particularly more diverse voices, whether that's in terms of gender diversity, social background? You and I have had conversations about people who might not necessarily fall under the bracket of neurodiversity, all of these different elements, really kind of bring color and vibrancy and value to an advisory board. So I loved that. And then GILD, which is the other network that you mentioned there, again, that was a no-brainer stepping stone as well when we're talking about being an investor, connecting with other investors, having amazing conversations about investing that you don't get to do with people who don't understand that world, or might not necessarily be comfortable or interested in talking about money in this way. And so again, that was a great gateway into a community of like-minded people, all have a shared mission, which is really to make sure that investment funds end up in the places that align with the investors. I think so much, and Callum talks about this, you'll have heard him talk about, people, if you're say you've sold your business for 10 million, 100 million, or you're the heir of a family with wealth, everybody wants a piece of that pie. Everybody wants it. But 99.5% of people who come asking for investment have their own agenda at the heart of that. It's like, I want something, you've got the money, I'm going to try and get that. Whereas what I love about the philosophy within GILD and how it works and why it works so well is we all have our own networks of investors, but because we work together, we're able to match up the investor and their personal, social, ecological ambitions, goals with how they want their money to be used and what kind of safety and what kind of return. And then we can match that with an opportunity that's come up from within the community. I think that's brilliant. It's such a different way of looking at it, and such a more collaborative way of speaking about investing as well.
Absolutely. I agree. And for sure, one of the reasons why it matches very well with my personality, with my values. Maybe 10-15 minutes ago you said, about collaborating and finding ways, and this approach of us, like you, as in having a dialogue with a person and listening to them, is really, really wonderful. And I'm very happy that Callum has been giving birth to these programs.
Yeah.
Lots of
Yeah, because I
wonderful
don't think he
people.
needs to. That's the great thing. These aren't organizations built out of entrepreneurial necessity. They're opportunities for him to share this kind of wealth of knowledge that he's built up over time with people who could really benefit.
Absolutely. So let's see. You've alluded to that already, but I'll just make sure that maybe there's something else we haven't covered yet that you would like to mention, diving a little bit deeper and focusing more, zooming in on board seats. How do you envision you can drive value for companies as a board member? And maybe even more general, like a lot of companies, as I understand, Callum, they don't even have a board of advisors. And one of the things I did for the Family Office Roundtable was I would ask people very informally, like, this is more like a gentleman's symbolic agreement. Like, would you be an advisor to that project? And I have people who say yes. And this gives me sort of this, this stamina and the chutzpah and the gusto to go out and what is it called? There's a word called, like when an heir steps into a business, they need to have this gravitas. Gravitas is a word that
Yeah.
people like, right? So maybe I don't have the gravitas myself, but I have people in the background, and that could be advisors. So more from this, like an educational perspective, why are boards important, and what value can one drive as an advisor, or having actually, like, both your perspective as an advisor but also being advised.
So the benefit for any organization, whether it's a business, an investment firm, having a board of advisors opposed to a executive board is we each have our own, call it an area of genius, right? A place where we know that we bring the highest value. But that means there are areas where we don't. And it's not that we can't do those. Most entrepreneurs and investors that I know are very, very capable across all different areas. But if you think about how much more value you bring to a project if you're in your zone of genius, well, imagine what it's like to have 5 other people who are each in their zone of genius, all supporting you. Suddenly you have a full circle. You don't have a triangle anymore where it's like, I'm good at this, these bits are not so strong. You have a circle where you've got this real spread of even expertise, experience, and insight, all unified towards the success of one project. How fabulous is that? How brilliant is that? And it's not the same as needing to then go and employ a suite of directors with payroll and equity shares. This is people advising the business from a very, very neutral space where it's their desire to see the project succeed and you as the leader of that project succeed. So that's my idea of why the benefit that I can see for any
Wonderful.
organization having a board.
Wonderful. Yeah, I agree. Wonderful. So let's talk about relationships. If one would go back and actually uh, search you up, then one will find podcasts um, with where you talk about being a mom entrepreneur and sort of you've mentioned your husband now, um, and how you're like cultivating this senior leadership team in your company. It all takes skill and wisdom and experience working with people, relating with people, being with people. And also in the context of Veblen and GILD, like investor relationships, in the context of a family office roundtable. So how do you view relationships? What's important to you? Those are just some actually very converging questions, but I would like it to be very open, like just take it away.
Yeah, I can definitely talk about the sort of philosophy around relationships when it comes to investing. So that's no problem at all. My personal approach to relationships is I have a really love the individualization of people. So what I mean by that is you have some people who like to approach personal relationships with a nice blanket approach. But I love understanding individuals and what makes them who they are. So for me, when I'm building relationships or when I'm thinking about relationships, it starts with the inquisitive, the curiosity that we've spoken about before. I'm really inquisitive to understand people on an individual level, who they are, what's happening in their world, what they're trying to achieve, what their strengths are, what they're really, really good at, where they're struggling, all of these things that comes together as a picture. And then help them in whatever way that is to really lean into their state of flow. So the thing that lights them up and the thing that they know that they excel at, that they're really, really good. How does that look within the company? When we built that senior team, we used profiling resources to help people, because not everybody's got very high levels of self-awareness, that if you spoke to them and said, you know, ask them these questions outright, I don't know many people who'd be able to give an answer. So that's where the profiling tests come really in handy, because it just helps to extract that information. And then we made sure then that we were putting people into the right positions where we were creating the opportunity for them to excel. So that's how we did that within the business. How I do that with investors is like we've just spoken about it. I listen to what their approach to investing is. So what's their risk tolerance? What kind of returns are they looking for? What projects are they really interested in? How would they want to describe themselves to their friends and other investors? What kind of projects really kind of inspire them or make them say, oh, yeah, I'd love to be associated with this particular movement or this particular category? So again, it's just that curiosity, that conversational approach, and pulling out. And because the curiosity is really genuine, that helps. I don't think you may have read the How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it says in there about showing interest. I don't think that you can fake interest. The number of times I've had people pretend to be interested, only then to kind of at the end of me answering a question, they then kind of go, oh, okay, and actually what I want is this.
Yeah.
And you just you're just like, oh, okay, you've just ruined it for me. Thank you very much. It'll come out in the wash eventually. It becomes
Yes, it does.
transparent. So because that curiosity is really genuine, that comes through. The other thing I've noticed is and you've picked up on it a couple of times, if you're able to share your vision really clearly with people, the right people will want to be involved and will be attracted to that and will get on board. The people for whom it doesn't resonate with will move on. And that's great, because you want people who are enthused and you want people who are inspired by your vision, because then we're all working towards that together. There's that thing like you can go fast alone or further together. And that's definitely the case, is bringing people in. And what does that look like? So you mentioned about us as a family, us as a business, us as a creating a whatever wording you want to use, but an investment firm with the activity that we're doing. It's all about establishing the culture. So the culture within our family, the culture within each of the businesses, the culture of how I as a leader show up in my board roles, in my mentorship with other people, in my conversations. That's about values. It's about passions and interests. And it's about promises that I want to make to myself and to other people. For example, if I'm on a webinar, I like to be the most valuable player in the room. Now, that doesn't mean if you think about most valuable player, that's a basketball term or a sports term, where it's not the person that scores the most goals. It's the person that provides the most opportunities for everybody to do well. So in my head, in any space, whether it's a webinar or a room, a dinner, it's how can I be the most valuable player here? And sometimes that's just making sure somebody else gets the opportunity to speak, that might wanting to speak, but keeps getting interrupted. It's like, I'm going to use my presence and my power to slow the conversation down and create a space for them. So that's just an example. That's my example. Everybody needs to really think about that and create it for themselves. I think we're doing this all the time naturally anyway, as human beings. Just most people don't sit down and think about it in order to be able to articulate it and extract it. But this is natural human behavior. We all have our own set of values. We all have our own sort of rules or, as I say, kind of promises to ourselves and to other people that we're playing by, but we just don't necessarily take that time to work out what they actually are.
Interesting. That reminds me of Buddhist philosophy and psychology, the promises sort of. But let's remove that, and it reminds me also of coaching and counseling, and it's like you're very articulate and we're very conscious. I really admire that, and I'm very my organizational psychologist heart sheds a tear from hearing that you would profile people and you would give them this opportunity to self-reflect, and maybe even you have a coach who is specialized in these profiles, and then he coaches the team and he kind of leads everyone into that culture. And one passion project that I have is sort of mental health. And when I studied, they would always talk about the socioeconomic status. They would only look at like your social environment and your economic status. And I would say like, but actually it's wrong. It's the psychosocial economic status, because the inner workings determine so much of what people believe in themselves they can do, and so on, right? So I'm very glad once I go and for the editing of the podcast, I will be able to listen to that a second time, and I'm already looking forward to that section.
How do you feel about me asking you for your insight on that question? Because I'm actually genuinely really interested in. I think the people listening to this as well, like having heard my side of it, you as the host. So what are your thoughts around relationships under the same?
It makes me think Professor Wang Gungwu from National University of Singapore. Professor Gungwu is 94 years old.
Wow.
And listening to him, I would learn within the span of an hour so much of how the world works. I mean, he's applying a historical view on geopolitics, right? And the world is in upheaval and in turmoil, and there's a lot of change. When I was born, the facts I learned about this world, it seemed like they were written in stone,
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
And then, I mean, I remember I had a crush on this girl, and I would go and visit her, and then I saw her dad, and he was in his working clothes, and I don't know why, but I thought, like, this is gonna sound horrible. I don't want to end up like that.
Mm.
Like with this belief that the world is as it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because it's not. Your fingernails are growing. You cut your hair all the time, your body, and then you have a child and whatever, technology changes and all of that. So this that always changes. And I struggled a long time with, we talked about neurodiversity. I struggled all my life with the fact that I would see the world ever changing, but the world would tell everyone it, it is what it is. And that's like throwing a water balloon against a wall. And then the wall will always win. Like this framework of stability will always win. And as I discovered neurodiversity and ADHD and all of that, and there is something called a scanner personality by Barbara Scher, I realized the way I function, there's maybe 10, 15, 20%, maybe 30% who are wired for change and novelty. And and I discovered that it's okay. And I had to learn this over 2, 3 years, maybe a little bit more. Nowadays I can make it my special talent because I don't see limits. I don't see you said something about being mindful of the personal limits of someone, and that is true. You mentioned it in the board section. Being an advisor, you have certain role, and then there's a limit to your role. And I kind of, in my role of this roundtable, I can kind of go into things and connect things. And so I see it sort of bringing ends together, and like synapses, then the electricity comes, and then there's a little bit of chemicals, and then they enter here, and so kind of like this wiring. So I think you said a lot of wonderful things, and I may not have touched on the question of relationships, but understand that I think my message is this: I wish that people listen to each other and develop this understanding for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a relationship when there is two people, genuine people, who are different, and who are complete with all their defects, with all their weaknesses, right? But then there's this respect for the person, and from that ground up you can start building, you can start constructing.
Yeah.
And then you see human development, and then you can see, like, people who were fighting, or who had these misunderstandings or biases. You mentioned about female leadership, you're strong on, like, inclusion and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can start speaking about these blind spots, these sort of, and sometimes they're hidden in language, they're deeply hidden, and then you can call them out, and then people can, like, be, oh yeah, I function like that, or yeah, I do have that, so let me work on that. And then kind of like that builds trust, that builds commonalities. And now I can tie it back to the investor, because then the investor can open up about, like, hey, actually I would like to do that. And like, okay, I know someone, let's see if we can talk to them. And then the agreements can follow, and then the investment can follow, and then hopefully there will be a nice chunk of return if we do the risk management and everything.
That's so key what you've just pulled out there, Veblen, because you're talking about creating a win-win-win-win-win situation. So you're talking about this idea of bringing people together, and what the way that you work with investors being ultimately about how can we create a scenario in which everybody wins. And that comes from the time that your skill set that you just mentioned, the time that you're taking to get to know the individual and understand what's happening. It's not just about investing, is not just about the money, right? There's so much kind of going on in the brain, in terms of when we talk about risk tolerance, that's nothing to do with money. That is a psychological element. We talk about, the vision for that wealth, the impact. Everybody that you speak to has some element of impact that they want their wealth to have, even if that's as simple as, I want the next generation of my descendants to have opportunity. Great. Like, you know what you want, what your wealth needs to do. How we create a situation that's going to provide that. Other people will say, I want my money to help save all the cats, or I want my money to build a school, or everybody's got their own intent and it's not just about legacy, because legacy implies after you've passed, but even while you're alive, what that is. And I can really see you being very good at pulling those together and creating this situation where everybody involved feels like they're walking away with a win, yes, financially, but also a win of the heart, a win of the intention behind the investment. And that's quite powerful and quite unusual.
Thank you. And just like you said, some people are going to watch this podcast and they're going to turn it off, and some will watch until the end because it's fascinating to them. And I see it like mining. I see it like there's something emerging when people meet in honesty and goodwill and trust, and with this accelerator mindset. And I want to add, there's this analogy. I don't know if you know. Do you know the stone soup story?
Yes, I was telling my daughter about that the other day.
Isn't it fabulous?
So it's where it's like, oh, get me a stone, and then it would taste better if it had some carrots and blah blah blah. Yeah, that same story. Yeah,
it's those soldiers returning from war, and they come to this village, and I'm going to tell it for everyone.
Go for it.
And they have nothing. And everybody's shutting the doors and like hiding all the food, because here come the poor soldiers. They're going to eat everything. We have nothing. And then the soldiers, they set up, they're knocking on doors, and everybody's like, no, I have no place to sleep. I have no food. The soldiers start preparing a pot of water, boil it over a fire, and then they add stones to the soup, to the water. It's just water and stones. And then the people are like, and they're like, the soldiers are like stirring the pot, and people are like, but wouldn't it taste better with potatoes? They're like, yeah, but we don't have any potatoes. Well, let me give you some potatoes. And then the next one came, but let me bring some carrots. And then the other one was like, okay, I'll give you some salt. And then somebody has some, like the more wealthy have some meat. And I love this. Like when you manage that, everybody just has to bring a little bit, but at the end, everybody gets their tummy really filled, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That mirrors so perfectly quite a lot of the key themes that have come up during this conversation about how investment isn't about what do I want and going and knocking on doors and trying to get that. It's about aligning a win for me and a win for you of whether that's values or mission or whatever. And that's the same for the board of advisors that we've talked about as well. There's this really common theme that has emerged, and I think that story so eloquently brings it together.
And if we then take it back to the property investment, you have tenants, you have suppliers, you have partners, the one who's doing your accounting or whoever in your company. You again have suppliers and clients. So you can really think about philanthropy, think about legacy during your lifetime, whether that's greetings cards to your clients or birthday cards to your employees. Like there's this way of having an impact in society. Surely those are the people I like to work with. And assuming you're on this podcast sharing your heart with us means we are in resonance on that. Wonderful. Is there something I haven't mentioned yet before we say our goodbyes? And I want to say thank you for jumping into the cold waters with me. And this was really a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed you and I enjoyed us. So Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the opportunity to unpick some of the themes and talk about what's normally spoken about on a very, oh, here was the deal and these were the numbers, but there's the philosophy behind that really speaks to me. I enjoy that a lot. From the listener's point of view, let's think. We've talked about the practical. So we talked about that business deal. I talked a bit about how we structured that, the finance. Talked about some of what's the one thing for property, what was the one thing for exiting operationally. Is there anything that you think when you're thinking about the ideal listener to this podcast that they might be hoping to go away with that we may not have covered so far?
It's a good point, and sort of the ideal. Well, I mean, I haven't. It's to me that's always. I know again.
Evolving? Yeah.
It's evolving. I'm not the type of person who can set out and write a long, detailed market analysis and be like, "This is my avatar."
Mm.
This is something that over time it's going to evolve, and I will take the podcast topically from a theme point of view. It will kind of swerve around, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking of this one person, and you know who you are if you're listening to this, that you're saying, like, gosh, I would like to meet Claire. I would like to learn more. I would like to, or that could be one persona. Another persona could be like, gee, that's a very interesting lady. Like, I wonder what's in the back of her mind. Where is she going to be? And how can I place myself there and sort of have that convergence in the future with someone like Claire Reid, whether that's on Veblen or GILD or property or business or partnerships, or somebody who is seeing you on a podcast, on this podcast, like, gosh, I'd have these questions about unpacking the analysis side or the creative finance. So like, I'll ask you what I generally like to ask my friends and partners in the network, in my network, is like, who would you like to meet in the future?
Yeah. So my big projects that I'm working on over the next, let's say, 5 years is I've established Reid Potentia as an investment company. But the more I lean into it and the more I get exposed to information around investing, because we're
Yeah.
always still learning, always on this road of development, the more I'm certain that Reid Potentia is an investment company, and it will definitely have these two asset classes where I'm going to be building a property portfolio over the next few years, but also, the private equity side of things. Not private equity in the big corporate American sense of the word, but my approach to private equity, where myself and other investors can come together and have that same experience. We invest in businesses, buy businesses, especially at the moment, because as you've already said, there is a lot of small, medium-sized businesses which are either going to have the lights turned off or are going to end up getting taken out by somebody else. And I want to be a part of the process where we are acquiring more businesses. So that's what I'm working on at the moment, and the goals around that. We're in year one. What year one of 5? Because I've only just sort of come to the realization that that's the path I'm on. And so anybody that wants to be part of that journey, to follow that journey, I'm going to be sharing that process through my social channels. Basically are all Claire Reid _invests, Claire Reid invests, and sharing that ongoing journey rather than the shiny finished project. Let's share the process. Let's share
Absolutely.
the journey and the learnings along the way.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. It's a great way how people can get sucked in. And let's be honest, like, most of us are always happy when we can look up to someone who is a little bit open about how they're doing things and how they're struggling, and then kind of what works and what doesn't. And then we're like, I'm human, but she's human too, he's human too. So okay, so maybe I can have that courage and kind of, and so anybody who feels drawn towards you, who feels your project is enticing them and they feel resonance, I'll make sure to link your profiles and your websites to them. And then I'm very excited because I feel the same way. Now I know, like, okay, for the next 5 years, there's this expansion, there's this Reid Potentia investment firm with those two classes. And then, we are not concerned about what's behind the horizon, but then we assume with good health and everything, then in 5 years, we will see what will be coming. Wonderful. Wonderful.
The name Potentia came because, so I was looking around this concept of potential. So it's not just about, part of it is my own personal potential, sort of realizing that and trying to find, I don't feel like I've hit the upper limit yet. I feel like there's more room for me to grow and develop, but also helping, like in all of the projects, there is this element of helping unlock the potential, whether it's in people or in assets via the asset management and optimization route. It's that whole idea of let's unlock the potential that's held in here, and that's where that name sort of came from.
I'm going to throw in very spontaneously this promise that let's have another session on this unlocking value from the asset. I think you've mentioned it many, many times, and I kind of always dodged around it, but because also I can't lead that conversation. I would completely be like, tell us everything that you find fascinating and share with us, maybe even a presentation or something, like a webinar or something,
Yeah,
right?
that'd be fun. Get some visuals going. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Because I think that educates a lot of viewers then on, like, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, I didn't know. Like, oh, wow. Okay. And then they discover that in their families, in their businesses, and in their investment approaches and investments in the future. Shall we do that?
I'd love that. I think that's fabulous.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I like
Thank you
that.
so much for creating this space for us to have this conversation today, Benjamin. I really appreciate it.
An absolute pleasure, Claire. Thank you so much for being here.